Ladies and gentlemen, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending where you are. I'm Ana Lucia Jacome, Senior Project Leader and Human Rights Expert at UNITER's Division for People and Social Inclusion. I remain at your disposal in case you want to explore possible synergies for developing learning tools. Before starting with the fifth and last event of our series, I would like to express our deep gratitude to those of you who are joining us today before celebrating Thanksgiving. We wish you a peaceful and blessed time with your family and loved ones. To start with the discussion, I give the floor to Mr. Alex Mejia, the Director of the Division for People and Social Inclusion and the Director of the International Training Centers for Authorities and Leaders, CIFAL Global Network. Besides of his experience working at the UN, he has worked for years at the private and public sector, including as the Vice Minister of Economy of the Republic of Ecuador. Please, Alex, the floor is yours.
Thanks to all of you, distinguished panelists and distinguished participants. Thank you very much indeed for joining us today in this workshop entitled Access to Cultural and Leisure Activities, Tackling Individual Interest Towards Intergenerational Social Construction. This is part of an effort, a concerted effort by several United Nations entities and champions of the issues of aging, including civil society organizations, academia, and the like. You are going to hear distinguished participants from renowned experts, persons that will share their knowledge so we understand why this series of events entitled Mainstreaming Knowledge on Aging hopefully is very conducive and can contribute to raise awareness about the things that we are discussing and hopefully also to better understand issues related to aging. This is the last of a second series of events, and I also wanted to congratulate my team for their effort, particularly Ms. Ana Lucia Jacome, that is with us today and will be moderating the panel. And this is the way to go. I believe that gathering experts and distinguished panelists as we will do today will really help us in this quest. Now, cultural rights. As most of you will know, cultural rights are means to express the diversity of humanity through values, beliefs, convictions, languages, behavior, rights, and so on, manifested in expressions like the arts, like the things that characterize our way of life. So cultural rights, culture proper, the manifestation, the practical manifestation of how society performs and lives, implies also the right to access, the right to enjoy those cultural manifestations. And if I may say, the way we see it at UNITAR, the agency that I represent at the United Nations, it's a pity that in some countries, as soon as you reach certain age, you are somehow assumed by the majority of society like not being interested in participating and in contributing to a colorful, fruitful culture. That is something that is changing. Thank God we see how the pyramid of populations is evolving, and more older persons remain active and committed. But we want to emphasize that also older persons have rights to participate in culture and in all these manifestations that I mentioned. To protect that access, we have to have these conversations and to raise awareness about it and hopefully also influence policymakers and decision makers. We all know that leisure activities can contribute also to economic development, can contribute to an international understanding, very important means for peace and dialogue. They bring about prosperity and very important, culture also serves as a conduit for the whole of society to understand better what is the concept of rights, what is the rights that a young person will have, a senior person will have, and anyone and everyone as a member of a society. So this conversation today will help us to better understand what needs to be done, where are we now, and what needs to be done. Now, I also wanted to tell you that there is a linkage, of course, between these challenges for older populations and public policy. And I wanted to tell you that as a former practitioner of public policy from my time in government, I believe that to adapt public policy to new generations of public policy that actually cater to minority populations aging less and less so, but minority groups that are vulnerable, the government officials need to understand what is happening, need to hear, need to listen to the voices of civil society, and needs to hear the persons affected by. So in this particular case, and in the right to culture, in better understanding, as we say, that we have to maintain access to cultural and leisure activities for older persons. We want to cater, we want to persuade government officials listening today that this is of a paramount importance. It's not a secondary issue. It has very many benefits, but also some negative possible effects, including mental health. We all know how important it is to tackle the issue of the day when it comes to solitude, to loneliness, and how this affects older persons. So at UNITAR, the United Nations Institute for Training and Research, we want to do our part in building capacity, offering training, or raising awareness through activities like the one today to actually call the attention of those decision makers. So to conclude, and in also hopefully establishing a link between the rights of older persons for very many things, including access to culture and this type of manifestations, we want to remember that the Sustainable Development Goals, this is the main ethos for all of us in the United Nations system, to support the achievement of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals as adopted by the General Assembly in September 2015. We're in the middle of that road until the year 2030. Whatever we can do to bring prosperity and improve the quality of life for this group too, at the forefront, if I may say, older persons as part of vulnerable populations, that is a priority for us. So I'm sure you distinguished participant listening to us today, I'm sure you have seen information on the SDGs, but if not, I invite you to know more about the Sustainable Development Goals, Agenda 2030 for Sustainable Development, and to join us so you can be an agent of change. You can be a champion for, among other things, the well-being and the rights of older people. With that, Ana Lucia, thank you very much again for allowing me to open the deliberations today. And the microphone is back to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much, dear Alex. To better understand this topic, I have the honor to welcome distinguished panelists who are going to share some useful insights. I encourage you, dear participants, to send your questions or comments to this to the speakers by using the Q&A Zoom tab. To start, I have the honor to present a video message from Ambassador Anita Pipan, permanent representative of Slovenia to the UN in Geneva. Her Excellency has been part of the Slovenian Foreign Service since 1994. Among different appointments, she served in New York, Buenos Aires, Belgium. Likewise, she was the national coordinator for the OECD at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and the Director General for Multilateral Affairs and Development Cooperation.
Excellencies, colleagues, friends, ladies and gentlemen, at the outset, I would like to thank the organizers, UNITAR, together with numerous other stakeholders, for the invitation to address this event. It is always an honor and privilege to be able to share Slovenia's engagement, good practices, and other insights on older persons. On the other hand, it is extremely valuable for us to hear and be inspired by the contributions from our partners. This enables us to work towards common goal, namely the improvement of the quality of lives and the human rights of older persons. My country, Slovenia, is a strong believer in the need for enhancing the protection, promotion, and well-being of older persons. They deserve no less. Currently, those aged 60 and older constitute 12.3% of the global population, a figure expected to rise to nearly 22% by 2050, with 1.5 billion aged 65 and above. The increasing longevity is a manifestation of the progress achieved in human development and health over the last decades. However, the rapid demographic shift has also shed light on the lack of adequate protection mechanisms, policies and programs to address the situation of older persons. The socioeconomic, environmental, health, and climate-related impacts on the lives of older persons, especially older women who constitute the majority of older persons, are intensifying. Aging in itself does not necessarily make individuals vulnerable. However, a number of physical, political, economic, and social factors that accompany older age contribute to the challenges that older persons face in the enjoyment of their human rights, as has been evidenced during the coronavirus disease pandemic. Older persons should have the right to access lifelong learning, vocational training, and capacity building. For many reasons, for example, updating or acquiring new skills for employment, and for reasons of personal development. Older persons are often denied the opportunities to do this because of systematic exclusion or ageist attitudes. We know that active lives of older persons can vastly improve the quality of their lives, where access to cultural and leisure activities play an important part, a spillover to other spheres of their engagement in society, and contribute to making sure to be able to age with dignity. Slovenia is active in various international organizations that deal with sustainable development and older persons. I'd like to mention the UNECE Standing Working Group on Aging, the UN Open-Ended Working Group on Aging in New York, or the Core Group of Countries on Human Rights and Older Persons within the Human Rights Council in Geneva. At home in Slovenia, senior organizations and non-governmental organizations which carry out activities for older persons have established associations at the national level. They amplify the voice of older persons in proposing measures for sustainable solutions in programming and legislative documents, areas of poverty eradication, health and well-being, long-term care, education, gender equality, clean water and sanitation, decent work, reducing inequalities, and sustainable cities and communities. A number of programs take place in different associations of older persons and other age groups at different levels, local, regional, and national. These can span from cultural events, sports and recreational meetings, handicraft workshops, reading culture, to learning digital and other skills. These are joint activities that lead to the exchange and transfer of knowledge, where prejudices and stereotypes are broken down. There are 15 multi-generational centers in Slovenia, where different generations meet, cooperate through concrete activities, and contribute to reducing ageism. They are an important core of cooperation, socializing, and various forms of joint action of people, regardless of age. A special festival for the third age has been organized in Slovenia for the last 20 years. This is the biggest event dedicated to older persons in Slovenia. Intergenerational events are an important component of the festival. I would also like to bring to your attention the specific non-governmental organization called Šola Zdravja, School of Health Association, that brings people together with the aim of carrying out morning outdoor exercises in all seasons. With regular practice, they strengthen the body and spirit, expand the circle of acquaintances, make new friends, and get involved in local events through the association. We are especially proud because this year the association received the prestigious Fit for Life Award by the Geneva-based Fit for Life Foundation. We hope this will enable to bring active lifestyle even closer to older persons. Ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, I'm confident that by acting together, we will make significant progress in promoting and ensuring human rights for older persons, both normatively and substantively. Slovenia is willing to contribute its share to this endeavor. I wish all the participants a fruitful and successful event. I thank you.
Done. So now, let me warmly welcome Madame Alexandra Santaki, the UN Special Rapporteur in the field of cultural rights since October 2021. She's professor of laws at Brunel University, London. Throughout her academic career, she has published over 50 publications related to the cultural rights of minorities and indigenous peoples, cultural diversity, cultural heritage, balancing cultural rights with other rights and interests, multiculturalism, and integration in international human rights law. Please, Professor Santaki, the floor is yours.
Good day to you all. Thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this event. And thank you to all of you who participate wherever you are connected from. Since my mandate on cultural rights was created in 2009, it has been a priority of my predecessors and myself to insist on the fact that cultural rights are an integral part of the human rights system. So it is important that we see the special measures that states are going to take, and also the understanding of cultural rights as part of the human rights system per se. It is also important to see, the right to culture as part of universal rights that should be recognized and exercised by everyone, everywhere, and without discrimination. And I was delighted to hear the introduction by the director that really addressed issues of discrimination. I am therefore delighted to see this event focusing on cultural rights in the context of aging, and I sincerely thank the organizers for associating me and my mandate to it. The right of everyone to rest and leisure is set out in Article 24 of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights and is closely linked, of course, to cultural rights. Culture is a transformative concept, and it should be guaranteed to everyone, whether this is a 3-year-old toddler or a 96-year-old father, like mine. Culture cannot be limited to specific activities and should not be restricted to the concept of rest and leisure. It permeates all aspects of life, from dry legal text to the vibrant colors and tempos of artistic endeavors, from our food, songs, and dances to art and architecture, science and technology, from the expansive virgin cultural landscapes of megacities to the quiet niches of small towns. And I just took this from my predecessor, Farida Shahid. And all these aspects, all these places have to be guaranteed, access has to be guaranteed by all. Culture is at the core of being human. It embodies our collective humanity with all its fragilities and imperfections, creative geniuses, but also darknesses, our pursuit of knowledge, innovation, and pleasure. This is what Farida Shahid said in 2015. So the right to take part in cultural life is enshrined in Article 15 of the International Covenant on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights and creates specific obligations by states. It is a right recognized to all, whether they are men or women, whether they identify themselves as men or women, whether they're children, whether they're elderly. And I think that it is fair to say that cultural rights have been the Cinderella of human rights. And within the Cinderella of human rights, we have the rights of elderly that have been pushed aside. So in general, the general idea is that states do not take measures and just do not create further obstacles for the older population to take part in activities. This is not enough. We have to recognize that states have to take positive obligations to understand more how the elderly are going to take part, what are the obstacles, how are they hindered, to recognize what the director said, intersectionality. We do know now that migrant elderly people there is an intergenerational gap with maybe the younger generation of migrants. And that's why very often we see them staying at home, not having a voice. So they are migrants, but by the mere fact that they're older persons, their voice is almost lost, almost as if they don't belong to the cultural life of the society. And this is something that the states have to take very specific obligations to address. It is not just about having access to a specific cultural offer and being a spectator. It also includes being active and having the choice, the spaces, and the means to do so. So my father is, as I mentioned, 96. He lives in Athens. And every time we go to a restaurant together, what he says to me, he turns around and he says to me, "Oh my God, I am the oldest here. I don't think I should be here, really. I think people are looking at me." In addition to education, so that people realize that actually he has the right, some would say more than I do, to be in that or this specific restaurant. In addition to the society being educated about this, the state needs to take specific measures. The state needs to take measures so that when the waiter comes and talks to him, can put up with the fact that his hearing is not very good. When he asks for something in specific, he's not seen as the difficult customer. When he walks in the street, there are ways that allow him to walk in order to go to the restaurant. Enjoying the music just makes him not an oddity, but something that a lot of other older persons do. As stated in General Comment number 21, contribution to cultural life is to be understood as a right to take part in the development of the society as well. So they should have, everyone should have a right, whether they are non-adults, whether they're adults, or whether they're older persons, they have the right in the vision of the society and how this vision is going to be formed. And this is part of the cultural rights. The recent experience of the pandemic has highlighted how much people of all ages and walks of life needed to engage with the arts and culture, to have these activities as an opportunity to meet with others, to connect at a human and sensory level, not just words. And unfortunately, we have seen in the UK, where I live, a lot of elderly persons who not only have lost the 2 years of their lives being in lockdowns, but finding it extremely difficult to go back to the society. And it's as if the state ignores that and pushes that aside. I was talking to an elderly friend only last week. She still feels that her GP would encourage her to stay in. The state has taken no measures to make sure that she knows that she can go out and she can enjoy herself. This means that the the later years of her life, she does not feel confident to participate in the cultural life. So we need to take specific measures for that. In concluding, I think that what is important is and what international human rights law, cultural rights, would guide us through would be the following. First of all, intersectionality, so addressing the different sections of the population and how their different identities interact to create obstacles in their ability to enjoy leisure, rest, and culture and cultural activities. Secondly, participation. What the excellence of the state said about how all people should participate in how they how we ensure the specific programs to make them inclusive, and the obligations that states have. The director spoke about the SDGs. It is very interesting that the SDGs have no specific role. There is no culture as a goal in the SDGs, and there is a lot of discussion about how there should be a standalone goal of culture in the post-2030 agenda, because this is going to make possible to have targets and specific vision of how culture and cultural rights are going to be realized. And finally, I do not want to leave you without saying the importance of creating common spaces that all ages, population of all ages can meet together, can talk together, not just segregation for children or segregation for older persons, but common spaces for all. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to hearing the discussion and the contributions of the fellow experts.
Thank you very much, Professor Santaki. We appreciate your insights, and we wish you all the best in your endeavors. We kindly invite the audience to read the special rapporteur's report on cultural rights and migration, which, among other topics, mentions the impact of a generational gap between the older generations of migrants who have a strong cultural frameworks from their societies of origin, and the younger generations who have internalized the cultural values and practices of the host societies. The impacts and findings are quite interesting. Thank you so much. Now we continue with our dear colleague from the UN World Tourism Organization, Mr. Igor Stefanovich. He's the technical coordinator of the Ethics, Culture, and Social Responsibility Department and a specialist in accessible tourism. Before 2007, he worked in peacekeeping and human rights policies in the Western Balkans. He has experience in social inclusion, cultural and accessible tourism, best practices across accessibility value chain, and the elaboration and dissemination of standards. Please, Igor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will just share my screen. Can you see it well?
Yes.
Yes, thank you so much. Well, I'm very happy to be here. I may be maybe the youngest speaker here today, but I've been through some personal changes in my life where I had cancer, acquired disability, and I come from a country that was affected by war in the 90s. So it made me think about all these issues that I read about before joining this event, because there are some personal issues that have to do with the cultures that we come from. There are issues that we see as internationally exposed people who have developed expertise in something. So we think that things are developing in a different way. So we see it sometimes through a privileged lens. And I also want to let you know what is our approach when it comes to active aging, universal access to tourism, universal right to tourism. So I would maybe start off with the first question. Access to tourism, leisure, and culture is in Article 30 of the International Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, where we are speaking about facilitating access to tourism, leisure, and culture for all people with or without disabilities. And most of people who count as elderly people or older persons, at least 1/3 of them will have diagnosed disability throughout their life cycle. So we have to ask ourselves whether it's becoming a good experience for all worldwide, or it's only happening in the most developed and mature economies. It's also something that we ask ourselves through tourism, because in 1999, we have adopted the Global Code of Ethics for Tourism as our roadmap to develop tourism globally. And we mention that the obligation of the government is to facilitate access to tourism, leisure, and culture for all people, including especially those who might be counted and grouped into vulnerable groups. So what is our approach to this? First of all, we have seen that there has been a big evolution, as Mr. Mejia and Mrs. Xanthakis have just told you about. There has been a social evolution in the way we see aging, the way we see access to culture, in the way we see the access to free time, to enjoying the restaurants. So this is all encompassed for us in our vision into tourism and travel value chain, because enjoying travel and tourism means sitting at your home, planning your vacation, planning where you want to eat, what you want to visit, how do you want to travel, where do you want to go, how you're going to do it, who is going to provide the transportation, is the restaurant good for you, are they going to understand you, are they going to be able to maybe accommodate your specific access requirements. Sometimes they're not visible, sometimes they're invisible, sometimes they're sensory disabilities, sometimes you just have some food allergies. So when we travel, we have to think of all these things. So when I started working at UNWTO 15 years ago, I could still hear the words handicapped, disabled, suffering from a disability. So nowadays we speak of persons with disability, where disability is a condition that is only one of the human conditions of a person and not something that determines you the way you are, or also your passions, the way you want to enjoy the world. And we're also speaking about older persons, because we all know the way we grew up, that there were always jokes about older people without really understanding that one day we'll get there. Very often we hear people saying he's a normal person. For example, in the disability case, we could say a person without disability. Very often I hear handicap parking, handicap toilet. So we're talking about accessible toilet, meaning that any person can use the sanitary infrastructure with or without disability. I come from a country, Bosnia, that was affected by war, and I live in Spain. So we are talking about a difference of 10 years of life expectancy. I come from a society where my grandparents after the 90s could not enjoy free time and vacation. It's because when you were 55, you were just buying a plot on the cemetery so you could pay the mortgage before you die. You were not counting on your vacation anymore. And I live in a country where ladies in their 90s go with a cigarette, with their dog, they watch the movies, they sit together and have beer at midnight on a public square, and that's happening in many developed economies. But we should ask ourselves whether active aging and intergenerational dialogue has to do with the GDP per capita, because I can see in Spain that the way you enjoy your free time is varying from the neighborhoods, even in the city of Madrid that has maybe 3-4 million people. You can see that people living in an area where GDP per capita is much higher, that their free time, leisure, the way they travel is totally different from the way people live in other neighborhoods. So we should have this, bear this in mind, because I can't say that, we all have different origins, people who are here today, but of course our work already gives us some privileges, but also give us the lenses to observe how people, live around us, and we can observe what's happening. So, and I'm also happy that nowadays we're talking about individual needs of people, because we should never group the elderly people or people with disabilities or with specific access requirements when it comes to travel and tourism into one huge group, because it's very heterogeneous. We all have specific needs, and we always send the message to the tourism and travel industries and sector that every client counts, because if you are not able to accommodate specific access requirements of your customers, in this case, elderly people or people with disabilities, you're losing money. It's very important in our sector to underline the business case, because if we only speak about the human rights, our experience is that hospitality, tourism, and tourism service providers, companies, big hotel chains, they don't care only about the human rights, because it's only one part of the picture. They need to know the business case. How much money are they losing for not being able to accommodate elderly people, customers, or people with disabilities? And what can they do to improve their customer service? This is something that comes up to their mind. If you tell them that you only need to cherish the social inclusion, our experience is that the private sector doesn't care. You really need to have the business case and human rights at 50-50% basis of importance. We had a meeting with Meta recently, people running the Instagram and Facebook, social media. Their outreach is much more powerful than any tourism promotion of any country in the world. And it's interesting to see and to ask ourselves whether the social media and communication are perpetrating the image of perfect and idealized lifestyle and perfect body in a perfect stage of your life with an ideal age, with your beautiful white teeth and your incredible body that is able to run and climb. So we should ask ourselves, what's the role of social media and how can we improve that if we want to have more diversity when it comes to communicating? So as I said, it's very important for the private sector to have the buy-in of this cause of elderly people enjoying their free time, because we need travel, tourism, leisure, and retail sectors to buy in this cause, to understand that elderly people are just clients as everybody else. So it's a win-win situation for them. And interestingly enough, before the tourism and travel sectors became more accessible, they became really embracing this cause. It was the shopping malls that discovered that they needed to adapt their services and all their services to elderly people and people with disabilities, because they were clever enough to understand that there was money coming in from this huge demographic group. So when I talk about accessibility and tourism, these are all my photos that I take when I travel, nothing professional, just illustrating different situation. So what is accessible tourism about? We want to hear things, feel things, smell things, taste things, touch things, and sometimes some of the senses, sorry for my wording, are just screwed up because something doesn't work in our body or in our or the way our senses have been set up, or the way we acquired some kind of disability or specific access requirement. We want to touch and smell the flowers. We want to swim in the beach. If we can't see the fountains of Tivoli World Heritage Site in Lazio, we can at least, for example, touch the Braille. In a Portuguese village, we don't need to abandon our village if there is a way to navigate through the cobblestone streets that are always a must in Portugal. So there is a way for people to live there and stay in their villages. There is a way to enjoy the nature paths if you want to enjoy your leisure time in nature, to visit the monuments, to touch one part of the reliefs in Granada and to touch and to see what's engraved there, to enjoy the culture. So this is all also about enjoying culture and nature, because this is the basis of tourism, but it's based on our senses. This photo, I took it in Spain, where we have a case of universal design. This is the driving principle and the cross-cutting element of everything we do in accessible tourism. Universal design means thinking about spaces, digital technologies, whether tangible and intangible features that are made for all people with or without disabilities, whether they're for locals or for visitors. So here I just took a photo of this family in a beautiful square in Girona in Spain. So you can see this is universal design. You see the grandparents sitting in the sand. You see a lady with her kids. One is playing alone. Another one needs help with a trolley. So you can see this is a place where both tourists and locals can mingle in every stage of their life, because this has been universally designed, better to say universally reconstructed, because this is a historical square that used to have steps. So nowadays it's a social space where all these people can congregate. In this photo, I put the words before quality and equality, because when I speak about accessible tourism for all, I'm speaking about equality, but we are also speaking about quality of life and quality of tourism service. So what is our response? Now we'll be a bit more concrete and hands-on. So we have worked for 5 years with the International Standardization Organization, with ISO, with civil society bodies in Spain and also standardization bodies in Spain, to produce an international standard to cover the whole accessible tourism value chain, So we worked with 85 experts from 35 countries for almost 5 years, because it was very difficult to have the interests of the customers, of end users with disabilities, of the seniors, to have them matched with interests of the governments and the private sector. Because in tourism, there is a lot of reluctance to adapt the businesses if they want to invest, if they need to invest money. Because in tourism, we are talking about 70 to 80% of SMEs, small and medium enterprises. So for them to understand that investing now is good for future, it's a risky business because they still don't see that the elderly and also like the senior market and people with disabilities are such an important market. It took us 5 years. We got to the result to have the international standard on accessible tourism for all. And this year we have been promoting this standard. We have realized during COVID that I think our predecessors, Mr. Mejia and also Mrs. Xantakis, they've explained that there was so much discrimination and exclusion, isolation of the elderly people, the seniors, and also people with disabilities during the pandemic. They couldn't enjoy their social life. They couldn't enjoy culture. They couldn't enjoy tourism, leisure, free time. So we've realized that this ISO standard is also a win-win now during the recovery process of all these features that are so dear to us and to everybody in any stage of our life. And of course, they're related to SDGs, and there are different SDGs that they're really reflected in this new standard. We have produced with ICOMOS, International Committee on Monuments and Heritage Sites, a list of tips for cultural tourism managers on how to implement this new ISO standard. We have 3 different areas, focus areas: heritage monuments and historic areas, museum and exhibit spaces, and also events and staging environments, because all of these environments and services and cultural features have different accessibility challenges. So what is the messaging? The messaging is that we have to innovate in interpretation. There are so many new digital alternatives that we can create if you cannot climb the Angkor Wat Tower, or you cannot visit the dome of a church, or you can't do the steps of a famous Islamic monument in another country because there is no physical way to adapt the access to this monument, for example, when you're enjoying your cultural tourism experience. So we need to innovate in digital alternatives, and we need to gather the feedback from end users. There needs to be a way for people to tell the policymakers, the governments, people who are running cultural tourism institutions and also preparing experiences, what works and what doesn't work. We should not invent things out of a blue. We need to know what people really need. And also we need to set the priorities. For example, here, we have 2 kind of sided approach. I'm also specialized in indigenous tourism, and I've seen that our colleague, Mrs. Xantakis, has also worked on that. So last year, I prepared with the World Indigenous Tourism Alliance a compendium of good practices in indigenous tourism. It has a focus on the Americas, and it's not talking about elderly people as clients. It's talking about elderly people as cultural creators, as the guardians of indigenous cultures. And during the pandemic, we also issued UNWTO Inclusive Recovery Guide in collaboration with UNESCO on how to recover cultural tourism and cater to different audiences and recover different audiences. We also work with ISO standard to adapt natural resources in collaboration, for example, with the International Union for Conservation of Nature, where we spoke about technology again, where we spoke about sensory disabilities, where we spoke about quiet trails for people who might be in distress, who might have a psychiatric disease, who might have autism spectrum. We also spoke about adapting the nature to sensory disabilities and creating inclusive playgrounds for children who might be visitors or coming from the local communities. This is the last output we have. Last week in San Marino, so I just got back from the Republic of San Marino, they say they're the longest standing independent republic in the world. So we adopted the San Marino Action Agenda 2030 to advance accessible tourism, where we have chapters for the governments, for the private sector, and also for all stakeholders on how to advance accessible tourism, how to enact all these things that we are talking about. It's been done also in collaboration with Accessible EU and European Network for Accessible Tourism. And what do we preach there? So these are all the publications that UNWTO has issued in the last years. We're going to continue doing that. So we need to do a compendium of best practices promoted in San Marino. We are going to publish a new book. We will engage with national tourism administrations to see which kind of policies and strategies they need. We will continue publishing research and guidelines and success stories on how nature and culture can be made more accessible to all. And also we will resume our Accessible Tourism Destination Award. And we need to sensitize on the benefits of diverse workplaces. Because if you are a person with a disability and you have the autonomy and the empowerment to work in a place where you can develop yourself professionally, your active aging is also going to work much better for you because you have had a more fruitful life that was more productive. So with this photo of synagogue in Cordova, I want to say both in Hebrew and in Arabic, Toda Rabba Lacha and Shukran, thank you, because I think we are going through very difficult times in the world. We get disappointed with things that happen. I come from a country that was affected by a civil war, and I think we need to see tourism and culture as elements and tools for peace. So this is something that we all need to insist on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Igor, for your wonderful presentation. We commend UNWTO's efforts in this field, and we hope that more and more countries implement some good practices to include older persons in cultural activities through tourism. Of course, that with your support. To continue, we are grateful to have with us Dr. Diego Bernardini. He's professor of health of older people at the Universidad Nacional de Mar del Plata in Argentina. He's also the director of the International Diplomate of New Longevity and founder of the Second Half Learning Community. Moreover, he's writer with wide experience in gerontology. Please, Dr. Bernardini, the floor is yours.
Okay, as I mentioned before, good morning. Thank you, everyone from Washington, D.C. Thank you also for this kind invitation. It is a pleasure and honor to share thoughts on this area with my colleagues, dear colleagues and assistants. I share in the next few minutes some thoughts about one of the main drivers and conditions of social development for the first half of this century. I'm talking about new longevity. I've been involved with this academic area for the last 30 years. I defined my specialization before my graduation as a medical student, adults and older people. In those years, all of the recognized specialists talk about and made focus on demographic change in quantitative terms. Today, we are looking how the phenomenon is not only quantitative, but is mainly qualitative in the way that people are living the second half of their lives. I could start setting up a framework to my words with two main ideas, considering a quantitative and qualitative approach on this concept described before. We are living a new longevity area. That means we are in a new century with a new culture constantly evolving, where a massive and diverse group of the population is growing and defining new roles. Complementary rules with the active aging political framework that in 2002 WHO shared to the world. New longevity, in a difference, means functional capacity, experience, wisdom, life course approach, life transitions, empowerment, rights, talent, etc. A new paradigm for the new century as the active aging political framework was in 2002. A paradigm of vigency more than productivity, a paradigm for a knowledge and connected society. Let me define vigency as the capacity to contribute, to give, to share knowledge, to transmit values and more. For society and for this age, it must not be a barrier. This idea is based on intergenerational culture, a point of view to think and to analyze society. The French philosopher Pascal Bruckner, wrote that longevity has changed our relationship with existence. He defined in this quote the need to change our mindset as individuals, but also as society as the times go by in our life. This for me is crucial. We need to start to see longevity as a process, personal and collective. As individuals have a very bad habit. Older people usually are the others, not me. Looking for ways to facilitate the mindset change, the evidence shows an interesting couple of things. Firstly, education is the main social determinant in our life. Best education means best opportunities and equity societies. In this, the idea of longevity pedagogy is an attended need. It's mandatory to start to train our new generations in the values, opportunities, and also challenges of longer lives. These topics start in the first years of formal education and should be facilitated during the whole childhood with intergenerational action, where the different levels of stakeholders play a main role. The other key point to me is the narrative about the second life of our life. Let me clarify why I talk about the second half of our lives. The evidence shows that people start to feel not young around their 40s. So we are considering life expectations beyond 70s in most countries around the world as the longer life period in our life, and also should be an interested period of our life. And once again, older people today are in a foundational moment. They are showing how they decide to live differently from their parents. So we need to build a new narrative, a new culture with new words. We need to talk in a new way as the people live nowadays to combat, to change the last discrimination barrier, agings, discrimination by age. For this, the way to follow in my consideration is the longevity pedagogy to create longevity literacy at all levels. Older people are shown through, by example, social media as influencers, as opinion leaders, how they decide to live the new longevity. As a society, we respond in many, many cases with aging's behaviors. We have the possibility, as never before, to think and implement our future. The new longevity is a real phenomenon. In conclusion, we aren't talking about the future. We are talking about the present, our present, where we need to confront and to solve the challenges of the longevity pedagogy for a longevity literacy for the society of new longevity, where intergenerational action play a determinant role. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. Bernardini, for your insights. The audience may find interest in your book, The Second Half, which is focused on quality of life, time, and inclusion of older persons, together with full insights to think out of the box about the new longevity. Thank you again. Now, let me continue with a recognized thought leader in visual literacy and in creative aging. He's Dr. Brian P. Kennedy. He's president of Brian P. Kennedy Arts Consulting. He was director of the National Gallery of Australia, the Hood Museum of Art, Dartmouth College, the Toledo Museum of Art, and the Peabody Essex Museum, and assistant director of the National Gallery of Ireland. He has published and edited books, contributed to journals and conferences worldwide. Please, Dr. Kennedy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ana Lucia, and thanks everyone for having me. I'd like to acknowledge Michael Hoden and the Global Coalition on Aging for introducing me to UNITAR and the great work that you're doing. I'm surrounded by an image I took of Christo's wonderful wrapping of the Arc de Triomphe. And he had this idea in the early 1960s, and it took 60 years for it to be realized in 2021, a year after he died. Artists don't retire. Art makes you alive for your total life. So if we can find our art, we're going to have a great life. And there's been a huge boom in public art and in the growth of cultural facilities in most countries, I think, in recent decades. For example, museums, the sector that I've worked in, have opened doors more widely, responding to shifts in society, looking for more equal access for all. And museum education programs have sought to introduce spaces for youth. And in many countries, they've plugged holes in education systems that have been de-emphasizing arts and humanities. And museums have certainly made efforts to improve accessibility. Generally, there's no more grand steps leading up to the front door, and visitors are now invited to enter at ground level. It was wonderful to hear all the ideas in Igor's presentation. But one section of the population that has not received attention from museums, adequate attention, and from museum culture is older people. And the reason is simply ageism. In 30 years working in museums, I now see that I was unintentionally, but fundamentally, ageist. And ageism, I think, just hides in plain sight. It's within the museum sector as it is everywhere. And museums love to say that they're loved by their community and how much they're loved. And many museums indeed are jewels of their cities. But it's just a fact that museums are mostly focused on younger rather than older audiences. Generally, they're concerned that younger generations will not develop lifelong habits of visiting them. So they make sure that thousands and thousands of children visit them on school tours. But why don't they seek to have thousands and thousands of older people visit them on tours? Now, most American museums are private, and most of them have bus funds to bring school children on visits. But none that I know of have funds to bring older people. Museums have children's centers and family centers, but are there any that have centers for older adults? There was a recent study in 2021 by the American Alliance of Museums that covers all museums in America that showed that of the $2 billion spent annually by US museums on education programs, 75% goes to school children under 18. And 25% goes on everybody over the age of 18. Now that's the definition of inequity. And museums have lots of good intentions, I think, but they're still bedeviled by ageism. Wall labels with tiny writing, darkened rooms, heavy entrance doors, and a lack of comfortable seating. Everybody wants seating. Now, for 3 years, I've been involved with the leading philanthropy organization that makes grants to address ageism in American museums, E.A. Michelson Philanthropy. And it has, over the last decade, been running creative aging classes in hundreds of venues across America. And the overarching feedback that's been received from thousands of satisfaction surveys, and the approval ratings are nearly always averaging in the 90th percentile, is that older people want to be seen, to continue to have a sense of accomplishment in their lives, and to reduce their social isolation by making new friends. Now, these creative aging classes can be in any art form, and have been, and involve a professionally trained artist in that form, working with a group of older people over a succession of weekly classes where the participants explore their creativity and make something new, and a final showing of their work to each other. There's been so much recent research, so many books coming out on aging, but of recent research, notable is the work of Yale University's Dr. Becca Levy, who's been working for decades demonstrating that many health problems ascribed to senescence, the biological process of aging, are in fact due to having a negative age belief. And having a positive view of aging, and that goes for museums too, can add to life. In fact, the studies have shown that if you have a positive view of aging, you can add 7 years to your life. And Joe Coughlin of MIT Aging Lab has shown that far from being a drain on the American economy, older Americans actually help drive it. So for museums, this has been the lesson of my career, older people should represent a vast reservoir of potential visitors for museums. And some museums think they have lots of older people, but no, not representative of the entire community and those who don't go to museums regularly. In fact, only 15% of Americans will go to a museum more than once a year. So even though we think we're much visited, we know that older people can be a real part of our workforce. They can be our once and future donors, but only if we treat them equitably and give them equal access to our education programs, equal opportunities with our facilities, and to feel comfortable in them and that they belong. So I'd end by saying that in this decade of aging that the UN has launched, it's time for cultural facilities to act now, and it's time for museums to act now. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Kennedy, for having shared your thoughts from your wide experience. You have left us with some food for thought, of course, about ageism, the challenges on it, and the role of arts as a means to express our identity, tell our stories, and learn from others, besides of the cohesive impact for societies. Now, we have received some questions from the floor. And the first question is addressed to Igor Stefanovich. It says, Mr. Stefanovich, thank you very much for your interesting presentation. I have a question with respect to the use of technologies to facilitate leisure activities by older persons and how it can support investments in universal accessibility and design for leisure activities for older persons. Please, we would like to hear from you in 2 or 3 minutes.
Thank you. Well, first of all, it was interesting during the pandemic that there was a huge tech boom and digital boom of all these new technologies, but not all engineers thought of the widest demographics possible that could be end users of these new technologies. So there was a bit of a lost opportunity for people with disabilities and seniors. And I think that now this trend is improving. I have seen, for example, very interesting solutions suggested by Meta, by different cultural monuments. For example, nowadays, elderly people who are, for example, active on the social media, they can see videos with captioning, with subtitles, with an immersive technology, where there is audio narration that is not done, by mechanic description of things, but by artificial intelligence that also conveys the emotion of the places. So there are many tourism destinations and cultural institutions that are investing now in their technology. If I'm not mistaken, during the pandemic, I think Prado Museum, I think there are other colleagues here who are more specialized in museums, it had the first TikTok account with the biggest number of followers in the whole of Europe, I think, when it comes to all national museums. And they did an incredible job. And there was a very interesting mix, but most of the audience was either the youngest people in their teen years, or the elderly people who couldn't leave their house, but have a connection with the Spanish art. So this is really amazing. But the question was, how can it attract investors? Well, it's a kind of vicious circle. If we don't realize that tourism value chain is such a conundrum of so many different experiences that need to flow, where you need to have technology present in every single segment of your tourism and travel experience, whether it has cultural or natural components, we won't really see all the economic potential, because we need to realize that when people travel or enjoy their life, they will always enjoy culture and nature. And for example, when it comes to natural surroundings also, it's the same solution when we are speaking about culture, for example. It has to do with interpretation a lot. So the old way of interpreting things when you go to a monument and you have a historian of art explaining with no communication addition in a very, I would say, PhD jargon, what the monument is about and what are you going to experience. I consider myself a relatively educated person. I even started masters in cultural management, but there are some things that I visit as a relatively educated person and I don't grasp the message the way it's explained. So there's a huge shift, I would say, nowadays, where you can see very simple narration when it comes to the texts, but the rest is really the technologies that you're using and the way it's going to be explained and interpreted to you. So I really think there's a huge potential there, and we have to be frank. All these big technological companies that either work in social media and or produce technologies like all different kinds of technologies, they are really some of the richest companies out there. The thing is, how do you connect them with the cultural sector and tourism sector to see the potential? Because I still couldn't give you a definite answer, because, for example, our organization has 170 people. We are just a small fish for any of those big companies. So you need to have the private sector or national museums, I think the question was about the culture, that would make a pitch to these big companies to invest in the technologies, because at the end, a museum can pay a monthly fee for technology to be maintained, but the number of users, the advertising that can be done through this, and the brand image consolidation of the company providing this kind of digital solution for people to enjoy cultural tourism, which would be like, let's say, my mandate, is huge. But I don't think this potential has been still untapped. It's still there. And I think we still need to work, on a strong message that this needs to be more exploited. Thank you. I know it was a message because I'm not running any high-tech company. It's just the opinion from my own observation of how things are going.
Thank you. We understand. And indeed, your last comment is related to the next question addressed to Dr. Brian Kennedy. So here, inclusivity and ageism are important elements with regards to the right of culture and social participation for older persons. How do you consider that the private and public sectors can support the efforts of states to develop intergenerational spaces for cultural participation and increasing participation of older persons in the cultural life of societies? Please, Dr. Kennedy, the floor is yours. 2 or 3 minutes maximum. Thanks.
I see that question to be responded to on a sort of micro and a macro level. On the macro level, it's wonderful that international organizations are now trying to coordinate to be able to address a lifelong practice and think about provision of services in that way. Through the idea of age-friendly cities, also, I think we're really beginning to get a more integrative approach. And there are many examples of where this is necessary. New York is an age-friendly city, but the commissioner there on aging, was the first to say that, they're still building a center for youth beside a center for older people that have separate doors, that have no interaction with each other, and that are actually run and funded by separate departments. So it's only when we look at a sort of a whole of government aspect will we start to think about this in a more integrated way. But I think at the other end as well, thinking about, for example, taking a model sports stadium or a model hospital or a model museum and integrating, as we've heard, a universal design or human-centered design, and making it a model that then can be repeated, actually not just in that country, but in many countries, is a great idea. And then on a sort of micro level, I think organizations, for example, I mentioned the American Alliance of Museums, that's 7,000 museums. So large organizations like ICOMOS and ICOM in my sector can really elevate the subject. There has been no conference that I know of in museum culture on ageism in American museums. Yet, none. And the connection between ageism and ableism is so obvious that we're all going to have disability of some kind or other, and we're all going to grow older, and aging is growth. It's actually a good thing to become entering into elderhood and hopefully some wisdom. So I think a mix of both of those ways of going, I think, is and will continue to make improvements.
Thank you, Dr. Kennedy. Now a question for Dr. Bernardini. What are some specific physical activities or exercise programs that have been shown to be effective in promoting active aging and improving the physical and mental health of older persons? Please, the floor is yours, 2 or 3 minutes.
Thank you. Well, in that regard, the WHO guidelines are really, really clear. I think that the evidence nowadays is robust day by day in terms of how important is that older people be involved in physical activity. Actually, the last WHO report in terms of healthy aging talk about functional capacity, and functional capacity is the interaction between the intrinsic capacity of the people with the ecosystem. In those terms, I found really an articulate effort in terms to work with initiative, as Dr. Brian mentioned before, age-friendly cities, but also in terms to have a very accurate diagnostic. In this discussion, regarding physical activity programs, ecosystems, age-friendly cities, and public policy, I think there are a couple of things that we need to remark. Firstly is to listen the needs of older people. Usually we decide by them, not with them. So we need to identify. We have to, as medical doctors usually do, we have a very accurate diagnostic of the situation. And the diagnostic is listening older people, listening their needs, their fears, their expectations, and also to make the change with them. We need to involve older people in them. And on the other hand, we need to do in terms of concrete actions the concept of intersectional, the concept of intersectorial. So Dr. Brian talked about social prescribing. That is now of our most strongest resources, like physical education to maintain functional capacity. In conclusion, we need to invest in the future. If we know that we are living with every day most people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, we need to invest in their future. And physical activity, social prescription, tourism, and this kind of intervention are the most effective. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Bernardini. And now for the closing remarks of the series. It's an honor to share with you a video message from His Excellency Ambassador Luis Gallegos Chiriboga, UNITAR's Chair of the Board of Trustees and former Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Ecuador. Please, Rafael, play the video.
Ladies and gentlemen, it is my pleasure to share with you some highlights of the series of 2022. This year entails special attention to the UN Institute of Training and Research, UNITAR, for its 60th anniversary as the agency with the mission to develop the individual, institutional, and organizational capacities of countries and other UN stakeholders to learning solutions to enhance decision-making and support country-level action for overcoming global challenges. As its chair of the Board of Trustees and president of the Global Initiative on Aging Foundation, I commend the efforts of the Institute in leading this initiative that has put together a powerful partnership among 10 UN entities, states, networks of civil society, organizations, and academia. UNITAR is grateful to organize this series in partnership with CIFAL Global Network, UNDESA, UNCLA, IOM, UN Women, UNHCR, WHO, OHCHR, ITU, ILO, the Group of Friends of the Human Rights of Older Persons, UN Geneva, the Global Initiative on Aging Foundation, GIA, the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuses, the International Longevity Center, the NGO Committee on Aging in Geneva, and the Harvard Law School Project on Disability, who have joined us in this effort. Since this multi-stakeholder effort started in 2022, it has brought together more than 50 prestigious speakers and 894 beneficiaries from 109 countries and different backgrounds who used to be more familiar with the work of one or more of the partners, but now are learning from a comprehensive manner. The participation of people from all regions, despite the time zone differences, and the feedback received represents a significant motivation to keep working. If we look back, the human rights of older persons and frontier issues, such as demographic worldwide scenario, human mobility, digital divide, climate change, have been at the heart of our discussions. This year, we focused on accessibility and its impact on individual and collective levels through the celebration of 5 events. These discussions have served to better understand core elements on access to justice, labor markets, political participation, health and social services, cultural and leisure services, as well as engaging different actors. We added to this year's series a slot on analysis of the legal gaps per topic, with a special emphasis on how the experience coming from the aging process places older people in strategic position for being the main actors of their own destinies. Those who have joined us, at least 75% in each event, have received access to certificates for participation by UNITAR. The final report on the series, together with the takeaway documents per event, with the highlights of the discussion and links of interest, as well as the video recording, will be available at UNITAR's online portfolio on aging and older persons. It is a pleasure to highlight that mentions to this initiative have been included in the different UN documents, including the report for and from the Secretary General. Last but not least, here is how you can support this endeavor: sharing suggestions, including one of the topics to be covered in the series next year, participating as speakers in recommending profiles, sharing information within your networks about the series, considering in-kind or financial contributions to develop learning tools based on the series, interpretation or translation services, or related initiatives. As you know, UNITAR is a donor-based funded UN entity, so any support in this regard will be more than welcome. Raising awareness and using knowledge about the sensitivities around the aging and human rights of older persons, placing this important topic in one of the priorities on your agendas. We are eager to keep building blocks for strengthening capacities. See you in the next series next year. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having joined us through this journey. With this event, we have celebrated 10 events since 2022. Around 1,000 persons from more than 109 countries have joined us. We are so grateful for this. Your participation and valuable feedback encourages us to keep working on this important topic. A special recognition to Professor Michael Stein from Harvard, who is not here today, but he has joined us in almost all the events of the series with a legal analysis. So we wanted to highlight this. And same as we did for the series last year, we will be uploading the takeaways documents with the highlights of the discussions and final report of the series at our online portfolio. We hope to keep learning with you in the series next year. Thank you so much. And this event is over now. Thanks.